All right, everybody. It's the Always Be Cool podcast, hanging out with your hosts, Bobby Kerr, Darren Copeland.
What's up, everybody?
We've got a really special guest today, someone that DC is about to introduce, but right away, his name is Mr. Doug Glanville.
All right, everyone, here we go. Born August 25th, 1970, grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, graduated from School of Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania, first African-American Ivy League graduate to play in the major leagues, drafted in the first round by the Chicago Cubs, number 12 overall in 1991. He's a former MLB outfielder from 1996 to 2004. He played for the Cubs, Phillies, and Texas Rangers. And in 1999, he was second in the majors with 204 hits and hitting .325. He's currently an analyst on ESPN for Baseball Tonight, and along with being on the Marquee Sports Network for the Cubs. He is an author, speaker, advocate, and co-hosts a podcast as well with Jason Stark. He is an awesome guy. He is a man of many, many talents. Doug Glanville, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
All right.
Yeah. No, great to be here, guys. Yeah, absolutely.
And Doug, just to let you know, I think I could have went 30 minutes on the introduction, man. Like you,
a lot of cool stuff.
A lot of awesome stuff, man. A lot of awesome stuff.
A lot of jobs, man. I put on hats and then take another hat off, and it's funny because being this is ABC podcast, I can't say I was cool. It was like a delayed cool in my life. Right. I was the guy taking honors physics and stuff. So.
Sure. Well, just to clarify, it took us a while to get cool too, but the cool part is basically live by the golden rule. Always do the right thing, always be cool, always treat people with respect. And so we thought that was a pretty fitting name for the show where other people are doing the same thing.
That sounds great, man. Perfect.
Yeah. So Doug, let's kind of start in the very beginning. Your journey with baseball. You're growing up in Teaneck, New Jersey, and you started receiving your first lessons from your brother Ken. Is that kind of where your love for baseball kind of started as a child?
Yeah, absolutely. My brother was, the first coach. I mean, I think part of it was my dad was older when he had me. He was in his mid 40s. Of course, I've had kids in the 40s, so I don't know, but I get it. And physically, I remember he was always in traction. He had some neck issues, and clearly the sports world for him was starting to diminish. But then I have this older brother, 7 years older, and he took a love of baseball early on. And as soon as I could walk, he put a bat in my hands, and he had a grand plan. He put it on it was like a score sheet book, and it had, you're going to play wiffle ball, then stick ball, then, you play Stratomatic. And so he had a whole thing mapped out of where I was going to go, and the big leagues was at the bottom of it. So he started that tradition in our family with the love of baseball. And my dad, being from Trinidad and Tobago, he came to the United States when he was 31 years old. So I guess he had some connection because he played cricket. He loved cricket, yeah. And so there was a natural connection to kind of go look into baseball. But my brother carried that torch, and to this day, I talk to my brother all the time about baseball, and whenever we play summer league games, we'd come home and just do play-by-play on what happened. So that may be our early broadcast days, but definitely started at home.
That's cool. So you said that your brother actually kind of had this grand plan for you, where he would write things out and write goals, and at the bottom of that list actually said, make it to the bigs?
Yeah, Major League Baseball. It had all the lists, and I probably need to find that score sheet, but the list was very comprehensive, and and I'm not a big goal setter, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do when I'm 21. And it was helpful for someone I certainly looked up to and tried to aspire to catch up to. He had this plan laid out, and a lot of it was fun. So I'm the younger brother. I'm like, yeah, let's go wiffle ball in the snow. Let's do it. So yeah, absolutely. He was visionary in that regard, and he's still playing. My brother's almost 60 years old, and he still plays in these over 40 leagues, and
Does he really?
He's into it still. Yep.
That's awesome. Well, actually, I heard you say in a different interview something about the power of written goals. So it's interesting that your brother had done that so early on, but there was something where you were talking about Shohei Ohtani Ohtani that his goals are so specific.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, right? Do you remember talking about that before?
Yeah, I mean, I was so blown away when I guess it was I don't know if ESPN.com or where it was, but there was a list that he had about all of his goals in his life. And yeah, it was very specific. It was like married, first kid, MVP, perfect game, no hitter, world champion. I mean, it was just down to like, I was like, wow, that guy's got it, figured out. Yeah. And, I'll tell you, he's obviously one of the most transformational players we've seen in the history of the game. So it's hard to deny that. But yeah, the written word I have a great appreciation for because I do think it's different when you write it down. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was a good lesson for my brother about how powerful it is when you put the words to paper and it just becomes more of a pact, even if it's with yourself.
One of the things that we always like to talk about, Doug, is, just the importance of, kids growing up and having mentors, whether it's someone, that's a relative or a coach or someone else that's important in their life. But, I mean, what a blessing for you to have an older brother because, that 7-year gap is almost a perfect gap because it's not like it's within 1 or 2 years and it's, it's super competitive, right, with a lot of other siblings. But, man, to have your older brother to be there and have those written goals for you. I mean, like at family functions, Doug, does he ever remind you like, hey, man, I'm the one that kind of got you going? Does it give you like that friendly just reminder of, hey, I was there for you the whole time?
Yeah, well, my brother is super humble and he celebrated. We were in some ways because we both loved the game. We kind of did it together. And my brother's the type of guy way back in the day, they had the scouting bureau. And the scouting bureau used to have a schedule of tryouts all over the country. And, it was like mail order and all this stuff. Yeah. And he snuck me in the Mets tryout one time. I was like 15 or something. I was just like standing in the bullpen. And, I mean, so he gave me a sense of drive for what was possible, really. And I, always am grateful for all his contributions. It wasn't just, coaching. It was a lot to do with life and dedication, competitive spirit, and the X's and O's, quite frankly, because when the Stratomatic was on that list, and I played this game as a kid because of him, and I started when I was like 5 or 6. So I learned about making lineups up and why do I want a lefty and righty, and just started to understand the nuances of the game and the data of the game. So I love the numbers. And my brother used to keep stats. I think he still does. He would keep all his stats for everything, from beginning, and he would erase it and update it. So I learned early on to, right after a Little League game, I'd go home and be like, all right, 2 for 4 with the double, and I'd have my slugging percentage. And I mean, I learned a ton from him. In fact, one day I'm not sure it was a stolen base or a triple, but he's playing, my brother plays everywhere. He's like in the North Carolina Hills. He's playing a league where there's like 3 people in the stands and they're all the wives of the players or whatever. So, nobody, so it's like some over 40 league. And I think he steals third. And when he gets to third, he like puts the base over his head like Ricky Henderson. And he's like, yes. And like, there's like one person clapping and they're like, what are you clapping for? He's like, well, that was my 900th stolen base,
Oh my gosh.
And so, he had tracked all his stuff.
That's awesome. He's probably got the spiral notebook, 3-rig binder of all his stats.
Yeah. That's great. It's funny. Number one, that's like the 4th podcast episode we've done where Ricky Henderson comes up.
Yeah.
Number 2, somebody else we were talking to, it reminds me of your brother's story, holding that 900th stolen base above his head. That was your brother's own personal World Series, right?
Yeah.
And so for his adult baseball career, that meant a great deal for him, and he wanted to accomplish goals. So whether he was writing down how many stolen bases he wanted every summer in his adult league, it's important for him to accomplish those goals. So that's a really cool story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So Doug, growing up, man, obviously you're very, very intelligent. Something that Bobby and I can really relate to, trying to get into Ivy League schools. Maybe, okay, no, not so much. No. But so you were one of only 5 Penn alumni to ever play in Major League Baseball, man. So how did that come about? You go into an Ivy League school and being able to be one of those 5 members of the Penn baseball team to make it to the majors.
I have to start with my parents, without a doubt. Background, as I mentioned, my dad came from Trinidad and Tobago. He was already a teacher in Trinidad. and he tried to transfer his sort of credits and ended up at Howard University on a scholarship, and he had to start over as a freshman at 31. But he finished in 3 years and then went on to med school, and really kind of self-taught in many ways. And he was a teacher in Trinidad when he was 14. So he was true Renaissance. He was one fun note of him is he was ambidextrous as my brother is, and I could do some things lefty, but my brother is a switch hitter. He would when he was teaching, he would stand at the chalkboard and he'd start with his left hand and then finish with his right hand. He wouldn't have to continue with one side. He could actually switch hands. Wow. So he was incredible, and I think coming from that spirit, the value of education, the power of academics, and then my mom, who grew up in the South in North Carolina, talking like Jim Crow South, and she had parents where her dad was they had a farmer, and they eventually owned their own farm and owned a service station later as they transferred that and in the footsteps of her grandfather. And she had 3 siblings, and both her parents were just like, they knew that education was a difference maker. So she ended up going to Hampton University and then worked in the summer to save money to pay for not only herself, but her sister and her brother, who also went to Hampton, and her younger brother eventually went to Howard. So they were very committed to academics. So I think from the time I knew that there was a possibility I could play baseball in college, it was already set in stone and certainly in my mind that I wanted to go to a school that was strong academically, and that was still the priority. Because even if I had this great career, I didn't know what was next. You retired at 35 or whatever it was, and now you're like, now what? So I don't care if you're sitting on a mountain of money. There's things you want to do, and life is still coming at you, kids and all these things. So I wanted to be sure that I had some options, and I understood that there was other passions in life beyond baseball. And so they gave me that. They gave me that focus. And so when it came down to, okay, where am I going? I liked the Ivy Leagues. I did some summer programs at Princeton, and I liked the fact that there wasn't a huge schedule. It was 40 games, it's a little fall ball, but the priority was getting your degree. And we had good teams. We won the division 2 years in a row. 3 years in a row, went to the tournament. But at the same time, I was able to get my engineering degree. And it was tricky because when I got drafted, I was like, I wasn't finished yet. So I had to convince the Cubs, everybody said, look, I'm going back in the fall to make sure I graduate. And eventually they were like, yeah, they were late. They knew I wasn't going to, stop on that. So I was like, all right, as long as I can graduate, that's cool. So definitely my parents set that tone, and, I'm glad I made that choice. It was, it helped me so much in the transition from my career to my post-career. And God willing, I'll be having a longer post-career than a career.
Right. Well, let's keep talking about that, because I've heard you and I've read some things that you've said about the deep importance of diversification and the importance of having more than one love, and whether that's your professional jobs or your hobbies, that diversification is so important. And you said that it gave you options in life, right? Making sure that you're focusing on the degree and not just baseball. So maybe stay in that arena a little bit and talk about diversification, how important it is to a person's success.
Certainly starting at home for me, it was the sense of being well-rounded was always there, and the balance. And although I have a great appreciation for someone who's singularly focused and, becomes the greatest, cellist in the world. And I understand that there are periods of time, even in my career, where you had to be more singular. I remember playing about 500 games over 2 years between spring training, winter ball, postseason, regular season, back to the winter ball. So I do know that there's times, but I also understood or believe strongly that, it's important to expose yourself to a lot of different options and avenues, and be open-minded to the possibilities, especially something as finite as professional sports. So I think, and I look at kids today. I have 4 kids, and, you're trying to we'll play baseball, but there's travel club and alternate uniforms. And, it's just it's hard to just casually engage and just find the love and play with all different skill sets and skill levels, and learn that empathy that, okay, this guy might have been picked last for the kickball team, but it's important how we figure out how this player can be a good teammate. Like the fact that everybody feels like they have to always play at this like elite level, the elite level of the highest one that they're at all the time is really tough. And the fact that where's the break? The fall, you're playing in the spring, you're playing in the winter, you're playing in the spring, the summer, and it's just one sport. And I always love like, okay, yeah, I'm playing Stratomatic now, but I'm also playing soccer and basketball and just opening up to different things. To in some cases, people get burned out when they're that focused when they're 10, and so I do think that translates to life itself. Just being able to be open to a lot of things and try different things, and I think that's helped me a lot in not only when I retired to when I found the next chapter. Being open to it and not thinking that, oh, this is all I could ever do. Because when you have that feeling about yourself, then yeah, I get why steroids happens and all these things happen, because you there's a sheer desperation where you're running so fast from defining yourself in any other way than a ball player. And I think when anybody's backed into that kind of corner, you take desperate measures to sustain it and keep it going.
Right. Yeah. As baseball lovers ourselves, I mean, you can see, it's not an excuse, some people doing the steroids or not, but you've been pretty, outspoken about the use of steroids. You were going through that era. So what was that like going through? And obviously we don't want to name any names, but what was that like going through that era of maybe seeing some other people getting back quicker or building their bodies up and staying in the majors using the steroids? What was that like to see firsthand?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. I think part of it was, well, I got to play ball here. I got to, I can sit there and complain and fight and all these things, but in the end, your career is like this big. The window is small, and I have to take advantage of it by focusing on what I have to do. And the fact that this guy's throwing 100 miles an hour at 40 years old, what am I going to do? I got to still hit this guy, right? I mean, right. And I'm trying to beat out guys for center field or different positions, and I know that there's some competitive advantages that they're leaning into. So there was a lot of frustration, but at the same time, I also knew that I couldn't get caught up in what choices they were making, to the point where I wasn't executing what I needed to do. And although the playing field was tilted, it was I did the best that I could. And I know when I retired, I was like, well, I had an authentic career. This is the best I could do. And I know sometimes people look at the numbers and like, oh, this guy versus that guy. It's like, well, is that really a fair comparison when someone, took steroids it's evolved over time how I've come to understand it. And I do know that these environments sometimes support it or, encourage it, those are stronger words, but also just it's part of a hyper competitive environment where people are going to do everything to find an edge. And that's not shocking. And let alone the desperation of holding on to your job, or you get hurt and you're trying to come back, all those things that make you more susceptible to cutting corners. But I always go back to my dad and Trinidadian phrase, shortcuts lead to long cuts, so,
I love that.
So
that's good. I'm writing that down.
I love that. That might be right up there with our other buddy, Sean Casey, who is on the MLB network, right? And he has a great saying that it's okay to suck, but it's not okay to skip.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So you might have an off day or game or workout or a day in business that you might not be at the top of your game, but just don't skip by doing the right things. Right. And I think and you've been super blessed. We talk about elevator people and basement people. We talk about elevator people that are lifting you up and always helping you go to the next level, and basement people who are some of those people try to hold you back or put doubt in your mind. And you've been in an amazing spot. You've had awesome parents, an awesome older brother, but as you got drafted, you go to the minor leagues. Was there anyone else along that path during the minor leagues that was kind of a mentor for you as you were making your way up?
Well, no doubt. I mean, my parents, and it certainly started there, and sustains. As my mom is 85, thankfully still still with us. I lost my dad about 20 years ago, but those lessons echo even when they're not here. Mm-hmm. But along the way, a lot of it was coaching. You think about coaches, and I always think of Gene O'Reilly. He's a coach for summer ball. Played for the, quote, Teaneck Lancers. I was like a prestigious team to play locally, and my brother played. So when I got a chance, I was like, this is amazing. I'm on the Lancers. So, I think of a lot of coaches. I think of, along the way, whether Tom Gamboa was my coach in Puerto Rico in winter ball. And, the lessons that stuck from some of the coaches wasn't just about baseball or how to play center field or steal a base. A lot of it was just the commitment and the professionalism that's required, and all those little elements. Like when I played in Puerto Rico in winter ball, that was game changing for me, because it was beyond, yes, I had a chance to compete against some great players, and performing well bumped up my stock as a pro, but it was also just going to a place where I felt validated, and, the fans in Puerto Rico, they supported me, things like that you realize, okay, this is how I create an environment where I can have the best chance at success. And I learned a lot of that from coaches along the way and different mentors that helped me. And unfortunately, when I got married in Asheville with my wife, and some of them showed up and they gave speeches we had a barbecue for our rehearsal dinner at the baseball field, the A-ball park in McCormick Field. And so Lenny spoke, Vukan Vucic, my professors in engineering in college. Wow. So all along the way, there were just touch points and often people that directly lend a helping hand. And, very quickly, you can't do it alone.
I like what you said. You said lessons echo, because we've all got people from our past where things that they've said or that they've done and that we've watched have resonated, right? And it's a lesson that just continues to echo in the back of our mind or our hearts. I've heard you say that, talking about the PED kind of era of baseball, that the thoughts of your mother is what really kind of kept you, on the straight and narrow, and kept you from choosing between the red and blue pills, right? In the Matrix, I've heard you say, right? Which direction are you going to go? But those lessons from your mom is what echoed in your mind to make sure that you were kind of always doing the thing full of integrity.
It was important. It was important to finish your career, play the best you can, know you gave an honest effort, and not look back at that. And there, just like with Sean Casey, there's days, I was bad, right? But there was days I felt terrible and had 4 hits. I don't know what, challenges you could rise up to. And I think that each time you face those organically, I felt like that was just strengthening me, because, I can be good even when I'm not at my best. I can, figure out how to be a good teammate in circumstances that surprise you. And all those things, I wanted those lessons to reach me unfiltered and not through this layer of sort of shortcuts or these layers of, well, is it me who's hitting the ball, or is that me on steroids, or is it, so it was an easy choice for me. And I think, to not go down that road. And I know that there's a privilege in why that was easy. I didn't, I had parents that were super supportive, and that was a point of emphasis. I had a great example in my brother. I had options because I was able to go to a really good college and come out of it with a degree that I felt like, oh, there are other kind of professions, and I don't have to put all these eggs in this one basket. I could go for it and do the best, and then when it's over, I can feel like I have this kind of future. All those things were certainly privileges and advantages, and why I have some empathy. When you see players grow up in the Dominican Republic, and some of my teammates, and not have running water, and their father's working in the sugarcane field, and their career is leveling out in AA. You could, that gives you a little more understanding of, okay, I can see how someone can feel a certain pressure to do whatever it takes. I think empathy is still important. It wasn't just about greed and money and breaking records, although that was part of it.
Good point.
It was also about insecurity, fear of what's next, and sometimes just straight up exploitation. Young kids getting exposed to these drugs when they're 16, 15, 14, and someone who's taking advantage of them. So there's part of it. And so despite, my strong stance on like, yeah, this wasn't right. It's important in anything to still have have an empathetic ear, because the lessons are in there, right? The lessons for all of us are in there. Because as soon as you think you're invincible, I would never do that, I'm above that. As soon as you get in that mindset, you're in trouble. You're in trouble, because that's when you're going to fall, because you're not open to the lessons. And the lessons aren't just for you, they're for everyone.
That's an absolute gold nugget.
It is.
Because the empathy of, thinking some of these guys coming from the Dominican, Puerto Rico, other countries, that they're coming from probably a long line of poverty, right? So they don't have, degrees to fall back on and some of the other family systems to fall back on. So, you could absolutely understand, see where they're coming from. As you said, when they're plateauing at AA or somewhere in the lower minors, man, that's a whole different ball game, because it's kind of either make it or break it for them and also several members of their family.
Yeah, well, imagine if you're you're a Dominican player or a person from Latin America, and your family legit might have had a concrete structure for a home, maybe, right? And are you really that concerned at that point? Look, let me back up. A lot of people, the conversation is, well, how could they tarnish a legacy by doing something like that? Well, if that's your background and if that's where you're coming from, is legacy on your mind, or is survival and longevity on your mind? Right? And so I think that's why it's an interesting perspective, and I'm glad you brought it up, because it is easy for us to play armchair quarterback, especially for us, and say, oh, it's not the right thing to do. But if that's your background coming from, are you more concerned about setting up your family for generations, right, to get paid, or are you concerned with, oh, the legacy of baseball is going to consider me in a different kind of light? So that's a really interesting nugget. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think we saw even players that may not even been from that circumstance still throw legacy away. That's
correct.
Because there is
the
a
other side.
And sometimes there's a selfishness to that. But yeah, when you play long enough and you see players from so many different backgrounds, you do have a different understanding. I think even when I wrote some of my very strong stated opinion pieces about steroids or the Hall of Fame or Bonds and all these figures, when I've written about it, it was hard. It was hard to write, because not just because people I'm gonna get in trouble or something like that, but I'm still thinking through the choices and sort of being in that environment and thinking of the case by case components of what goes into that. Sure, of course, as a player, it affects me in the playing field and all these elements, but I think it's still important to understand as much as you can on how these choices come about. And then from there, you can try to create, stronger policy, try to make a difference that way, make sure that you have support systems for these players that are, 16 and coming out of a place where they don't have a lot of support. And then they're influenced by people who have their own agendas and don't care about their health or their well-being. They just want the immediate gratification. And that exists as well. So, but yeah, I'm hopeful that, we've made a lot of strides in addressing PEDs but it's something you always have to be vigilant, because there's always some new flavor of the week.
Yeah. And no matter what decades, throughout baseball, there's always something, right, that people were trying to use to get an edge.
Oh, sure.
Way back in the day, whatever that, whether it's substance or anything like that. So, that kind of transitions us to, having some teammates and other guys that might be in the clubhouse that are looking out for you. And in the past, you have mentioned that both Sean Dunston and Gary Maddox looked out for you in the past. Can you kind of collaborate, expand on that?
Yeah, no question. The mentorship is such a big part of baseball, passing down of anything. And baseball has this natural connection to it, because you're playing every day, you're in a small group, you're traveling together, and there's a lot of old school traditions. You call them unwritten rules, whatever you want to call them. But the idea that you're passing down things that aren't necessarily like written in stone, but just cultural understandings, sportsmanship, respect, all these things that you learn, not just from, playing how to, know that there's 3 outs in a half an inning or something, but because you are understanding like how to play the game from some of the experienced players that have been out there. Sean Dunston was one of those figures that often pulled me aside and talked me through a lot of things, just the dynamics of just being a pro. I remember watching him have back surgery, come back, pop up to second in spring training, and I'm too busy. I'm looking at the ball up in the sky and look down, and Sean Dunstan's at second base. I was like, wow, that's amazing, So I was like, there was just no excuse after that point that you need to hustle. You need to play hard and hustle. So that was big to see. And along the way, various mentors, definitely touched me to give me that sense. And, I just remember going to spring training, and Chuck one of my first spring trainings in the big league roster, Chuck McElroy, these guys were like, oh no, you can sleep on the couch. Don't even pay us for rent. People looked out for you. And then when it happens that you become the veteran, you pass it on to the next. And I remember talking to Chase Utley, and Chase Utley was like, I think he got sent down, just like I did one year in 95 or 96 back to AAA. And Mike Morgan pulled me aside and said, hey, if you do what you have been doing up here in the AAA, you'll be right back here. Just keep working hard. And when Chase got sent down once, I said the same thing to him, just saying, hey, this is, I'm an old man now. So, I'm the 25th guy on the roster. So just come take my position. It's fine. Just work hard. You will get here. But you just got to go down with a positive attitude and come back. And so it's always nice to see that you care about the game and you want to preserve it. And so you pass it on through mentorship. Sure. And it's a continuum.
Well, staying there and talking about being a teammate and talking about the different types of players, the different backgrounds, and helping one another, you wrote a book called The Game from Where I Stand, and basically about how players, can deal and cope with normal, everyday, every person situations, anxieties, disagreements, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, coaches, different leaders, family issues. So maybe let's talk a little bit about how these types of things do affect, Major League Baseball players just like they affect everybody else, and why you kind of put it on your shoulders to bring some things to light and how it's positively impacted not only the game, but people that you've known in your circle and outside of baseball.
Yeah, well, the first connection I've made is baseball, because it's something I've done since I could walk. There's an element of that is sort of my worldview. My worldview flows through my experience, certainly growing up in a town like Teaneck that was diverse and exposed to many different types of people. That was always a beautiful thing. But sports brought that together, brought it to light in very powerful ways, because just like, I would go to spring training every year and see people from all over the world, and we'd have to figure out how to be a team. And a lot of the preconceived notions, the perceptions, all these things that are kind of meaningless in the end when you actually have evidence, when you're with somebody and you say, oh, okay, I do have a better understanding of my biases now that I've, been exposed to people from this background, and now I understand. And when you're doing that in an environment where you have a common goal, you're trying to win together, and it's set up, the structure of sport or just baseball specifically is that you have to have rules to uphold, and they have to be distributed, applied fairly. And that sense of fairness is important not only to the game's integrity, but because it sets another example of what larger society can aspire to have, right? You have laws, you have all these ways that when they're applied fairly, then you have a fair society. And sports always gave me that sense of, this is so much bigger than just baseball, or this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to play with different people and come together on something that's bigger than just identity or the box that you get checked or whatever, but that you can oversee things, you can transcend things because you care about this outcome and you want to do it together, and you have to do it together. And also the fact that the game only exists and maintains itself when you actually have rules that are consistent and fair and applied. You can't have somebody shooting into a basketball hoop the size of the Atlantic Ocean, and then the other side is the size of a postage stamp, and call that fair. People who would be on either team, first of all, the people shooting into the ocean may, if all they care about is winning, that's one thing, but do they feel like they've achieved anything when someone is playing, with such a disadvantage? So I think even as a strong competitor, you want to beat someone fair and square. You want to beat them knowing that they gave your best, and you just, whatever extra you had that day that allowed you to prevail, and that you live to fight another day, and they will too. And that's what I love about how sports is a microcosm or a proxy for not only larger society, but what we can aspire to reach in larger society.
So staying there with the book, I think you've talked about the different situations that players get in, right? The different situations that are challenged to players during their career, whether it's financial or whether it's, I've heard you talk about the growing number of divorce or financial ruin or drug abuse or alcohol abuse by players today. Is there a theme? Is there a cause? Is there a way to educate and improve? You're obviously very, very big about education, not necessarily just formal, but just lifting people up to make them smarter in their situation. So kind of maybe speak to the grandiose macro look at baseball in particular with these themes that we're seeing.
Well, and also have the teams over time, over the past 20, 30 years, Doug, have the teams made more of a focused effort realizing that there's an issue with these? Have they done a better job bringing in, guys like the Doug Glanvilles of the world to come and speak to these young kids about those pitfalls?
Yeah, well, there's no question that a lot of this goes back to that point of transition. When you're leaving the game and your identity is very much woven into it, no matter what options you have, it's a very hard time. And when you're going through that, and you're going through that as a spouse, as a father, all the elements, this is where a lot of times things can go off the rails, so to speak. You have a situation where now, you've been gone all this time. Let's say you played 15 years, and now you're home, and you're trying to figure out how to adapt to this new world where there's not this competitive element every day, and all of a sudden, your kid is waking you up at 2 a.m. and you're like, what? It's like all the things that you were, gone. You were absentee in many ways, at least certainly during the bulk of this 8-month season, basically. So I think that creates a lot of stressors. And I remember a long time ago, an advocate, I believe, for a lot of player wives was talking about these numbers. And in sports, the divorce rate was very high, higher than already what is high in society, but also so much of it was concentrated shortly after an athlete retired. And I don't know what the numbers are now, but I know that transition is always still hard, no matter how much money you've made, no matter, it's just it's a new relationship, not only with the people around you, but with yourself and how you define yourself. So I was fortunate because I found something. I had other passions, and I love writing. I found my moment with the steroid story with the Mitchell Report, and I was able to parlay that into other things, and find a new passion, a new love. And I got married post career shortly after, maybe like a year and a half after I retired. So, I built my sort of family life after my career was over. I don't know if it was a conscious effort, maybe a subconscious effort, but I knew that relationships, were really tough during the season and playing days. And, my father got sick in 2000, and he had a major heart attack, stroke, all these things started to plague him. And it was really hard to just deal with that for 3 years of just feeling giddy and away, and all the ways he was suffering, and getting calls from the ER and trying to help my mom support my dad and help my mom just support her. So much was on her to just keep my dad alive, let alone just try to go day to day. And he did pass away eventually in 2002 on the last game of the season. And I think, that was 3 years of my career and my life that it was just like a blur. And so you can imagine, even in those scenarios, how challenging my relationships around that were, because of the fact that we're all trying to figure out this crisis. And so, all these players are dealing with this all the time. And, so I think, as you mentioned, sometimes the way people turn to things or don't find positive outlets to deal with that, you can go down a very dark path.
To DC's question, is the league or Are individual teams, do you see them trying to shed light on these types of situations in order to educate and set up players for success in the future?
Yeah, I think the challenge with it, and I've spent a lot of years with the players, the Alumni Association, MLB, PAA, and we have a player welfare group, and I've done various things over the years, but for the most part, I found when I was serving on the actual board, it was hard to figure out who was going to be responsible, right? Is it the Players Association? Is it the Players Alumni Association? Is it the teams? Is it the league? Is it the individual? I always felt like that kind of constant merry-go-round of like, how do we partner on this has always made it a little tricky to come up with something that sustains. And, and so there are programs, MLB, PA, the alumni, have MLB Clubhouse, and they try to support there's life skills and transitional services to help. So there's some of that, and definitely much more than it used to be. But as I think there's still more out there to be done, and there's no question that players are, giving you many examples every year when tens of them retire and are trying to figure out what's next. That need will never go away.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I wanted to touch on, we want to go back to your baseball just for a second, and then we want to dive into your current passions of what you're into right now, Doug. So take us back. So this was a special time for the Cubs, right? We're coming up on 20 years ago. It was in the 11th inning of Game 3. It's the 2003 National Championship Series, and you hit a game-winning triple for the Cubs, which at that time, obviously they hadn't won the World Series, and what was it, 2016 at the time. But, man, how did that feel to hit a game-winning triple, and how did your teammates react to that?
That was amazing. I mean, it was amazing. And I think part of it was because of the journey to get there. Because that season, 2003, I signed with Texas as a free agent. And I got hurt within the first 2 weeks of the season, and took me 2 months of rehab. And it was one of those moments like, a hamstring injury. I don't know. This might be it, because I was getting to be an old man. I was 33, 32, 33. And so I came back. I was able to come back. And that in and of itself was an accomplishment, just to get back on the field. Right. And then I thought about how that previous offseason I lost my father. And so a lot of stuff was going on in life that were really the true hurdles to getting back to normal, getting back to some semblance of like accomplishment as a ball player. And so I always remember these questions when, I'm in media now. So if someone says they get a big hit, it's like, oh, is that the biggest hit of your career? And because it's on the stage and it makes sense, there's 70,000 fans, it's Game 3 of the playoffs. Yes, it makes a lot of sense that that's a big hit. But what made that big wasn't just because of the audience, but was because of what I had overcome personally and relationships-wise to get there, to just be on the field with something. And because I knew that moment when I tore my hamstring tendon, I was like, I don't know, this could be it. I don't know. I just had no clue how I'd come back from that. Sure. So I always use that experience to be humble about when I'm asking someone a question about, is that the biggest hit of your life? To give them room to explain that the biggest hit might have been, Trey Mancini coming back from cancer. It's not because it's Game 7 of the World Series. It could be just your own personal walk of things that you overcome on this personal level.
Yeah. You're talking about hurdles, right? Your own personal walk. Have you ever had any detractors in your life and your career that basically made you say, there's no way I'm letting this person get to me. I'm going to accomplish my goals. Because we're very, very, in fact, what we do for our company is we make sure that we survey every single client we have, right? Whether we think it was going to be a positive experience or whether something went a little sideways, we always want to know
ways to improve,
right? So in our personal life, our professional life, did you have any detractors? And if so, how was it that helped you kind of set yourself up for more success in the future to make sure you turned it into a positive?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, I think it's no way you can make it through this world without a whole lot of detractors, I definitely had detractors. I mean, in sports and baseball, there's always someone that can say, well, you're not a good outfielder or you're not a good base runner. There's so many facets of the game, which is what I love about baseball, right? The fact that you have to learn so many elements. You're playing offense and defense, and you're doing so. There's always room. But, I think my biggest detractor was my manager in AAA for the Iowa Cubs. Ron Clark. Yeah, he was rough on me, and that's probably an understatement. But I do appreciate as I got older later in life is that you do have to thank your detractors as well as your supporters. They are very much a part of how you are able to do what you do. I think in the case of detractors, it can be a moment where you're tested. Where do you stand on this? Are you willing to kind of go through this wall for this? Are you willing to take the power away from someone who's trying to destroy you, let's say, or whatever it may be? I think I needed to come to grips with what that meant. And so, I would be a very different player if I didn't have Ron Clark. And so I have to, with all humility, you have to just be like, that's part of it. That was part of the road. And I remember Tom Gamboa, my manager in Puerto Rico, in Mayagüez, he said, look, if you retired after AAA, after what you went through with Ron Clark, everybody would have said, okay, we get it. Oh yeah, that was terrible. I fully understand. I would have had a very good story to tell to say why I didn't make it. He said, but then, Tom would say, but then you're giving him all the power, because it's more powerful to say, and despite that, and so I look back and, those lessons from Ron Clark were hard ones. And I'm not saying he did them out of the kindness of his heart because he loved me, but they still had value. And so I think I can't separate, where, my career without knowing that he or many others that may have said, we don't believe you're going to be hit right-handers. We don't believe you're going to hit enough power, whatever it is, all the things that are said. Every player has that. And so, yeah, they're important. And I think that I expect there'll be plenty more in my life, but I think it's, fortunately, there's also people I can lean in and lean with that have my back. And that's important.
Yeah, that's such an awesome point, Doug, because, we have the saying in our office and some of the businesses we have, and I tell some of our people who might have haters, because if you have any type of success, you're naturally going to have some type of haters out there, whether it's family or friends or anything. But I kind of joke around with them and say, listen, you actually need to write them a thank you card, because if you turn that, just like you did with Ron Clark, if you turn that into a positive and kind of use that as fuel for motivation that, hey, I'm not going to give up, I'm going to keep trying, and I'm going to succeed, that without some of those detractors and maybe questioning, whether it's business or baseball, that you're actually going to make it to the next level, I think that people can just use that in a positive as that fire to take that next step. Because just like you, you would have had a story, but it wouldn't have been quite as good a story of, hey, I made it to AAA and that was really, really good, but I did make it because of this guy. No, you pushed and went further from that. And not only did you have an awesome major league career, you got game-winning hit in the NLCS and all these other accomplishments after baseball. Dude, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing. We call it, what do we call our fans? Fans are either on the sidelines with pom-poms or pepper spray.
Yeah, that's actually that's a combined quote between us and Les Norman. True story. We always said we want to make sure who's holding pom-poms when you have your successes, and Les added to it, yeah, you want to make sure that they're not holding pepper spray. And so we love that one.
Yeah, well, I always think of Les can relate to this. I know we've talked at different times, but I know we'd always notice who people we've known a long time, and then there's people that show up when you're in Yankee Stadium, and then there's people who show up when you're in Winston-Salem in low A ball.
It's the same thing. Yeah, good
right.
metaphor.
That's exactly right.
That's good. So I got a quote for you, okay? Quote, the only game where there's a right way to play. Okay, that's a Chris Rock quote. Mm-hmm. So my question and topic for you is, baseball is is played differently in so many different parts of the world, right? And in the Dominican or Latin America countries, you've got this celebratory way that baseball is played, right? It's high energy. It's kind of like a party, and it's celebrated. In parts of Asia, right? You've got, Japan. In Japan and Korea, you've got a certain way that gosh, guys are doing backflips, like literally, right? You're doing backflips celebrating the game. And then in the United States, we have a very traditional, buttoned-up way to play the game. How and why do you think that transitioned in so many different parts of the world? Is it simply just to easily say the culture, right? The cultural background is a different way, and so therefore in the United States we're just trying to keep it reverent. So maybe just talk for a few minutes before we wrap up the show on how the game has evolved so differently in other parts of the world, but not necessarily in the United States.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think it is cultural. I think like anything else, you might start as the inventor of something and have a vision for it, but then you open it up to the world, and the world takes it and makes it its own. And I think that's a good thing. I think you have a way to express it and celebrate it in different ways. And think like food. Okay, I make spaghetti. I take it to wherever else, and it's noodles here, and it's wherever you take it. Empanadas. How many countries have empanadas or forms of empanadas, right? Trinidad and so I think that is cultural. You add your own flavor. It depends on what spices are available, temperature, what kind of water, how you cook it, all these things. And I think baseball is no different. The fact that you have these elements. And I played in Puerto Rico for 2 years, and that changed everything for me, first of all, because I had this validation of support, but I also watched the game, like you said, be celebrated in a different way. Eventually we had like a salsa band, and we had, it was just a blast, and it, helped me come out of my shell in some ways, even though I still played my style, and, I wasn't flipping bats or anything, but I just had a certain inspiration from being in Puerto Rico. And so, so baseball in America, maybe being kind of the more original form of it, also has that reference point to look back and say, oh, this is how it started, and we kind of holding on to things in a certain way. And sometimes that's out of fear or out of whatever. But now the game with players, 30% of the players are from Latin America. And, I think that's sort of the tragedy of the Fernando Tatis Jr. story, because he was a guy up until this point was the transformer in many ways. Like, he came on the scene. It was like, I'd never seen a young player have so much of an impact on veteran players saying, oh yeah, that's okay. I just never seen that, and not only just on the field, but in the collective bargaining room, they're negotiating for pre-arbitration money, saying, hey, these young guys are this good and they need to be paid. Are you kidding me? Back in the 90s, and they'd be like, what?
Nobody was looking out for the young
right.
guys. Yeah.
No. You pay your dues. And like, and I'm not saying that's like wrong, but that's how it was. And I think, and it's not just Tatis Jr., there's a lot of incredible young players that are productive. So I do think that the game was, or has been slowly kind of, all right, let's try to like loosen up a little bit. And to get the younger generations of fans, you kind of have to, if that's what you want. Baseball is always skewed older. And look, I love the storytelling. And so, I'm in my element. But I do understand, like, to grow the game, to sustain the game, you need to still have some appeal. And the biggest appeal is 23-year-old Juan Soto's of the world out there just having fun and dancing and around the bases. So be it. So I think that's it should be, if this is, quote, America's invention, and now it's representing all these countries coming together, because you are saying you're the world, you should embrace the world. And really, and if you're going to do that, then you will have a very diverse set of ways you declare something, quote, the right way. You'll have a way that's for all of us. And I think that just makes the game greater.
Exactly. Well, and also, having a great game, but the younger generation, this is such an old statement from our perspective, but the attention span of the younger generation with the social medias and everything like that, we got to keep them involved with baseball and keep it moving a little bit quicker. So they stay, engaged and want to root for these guys like the Juan Sotos of the world. So, also we want to be very mindful of your time, but like, if there's one good piece of advice that you could give our listeners, Doug, what would it be? What would be something, from the heart that you could give to advice of some of the people that are listening to today?
Yeah, I don't know if I have that. Trying to think of the best sort of silver bullet advice. I mean, I look at my life and I look at today, and I think there's some things that are heartening, and that you're seeing different people, different kinds of people, different walks of life, find a voice in throughout society. And I think that's important. If I live through what I believe is the best of baseball, or at least what I've learned from baseball, it is this power of bringing people together, what a team truly can be. I think that's the most enduring lesson that I appreciate the most. And probably what I enjoyed the most of the game was coming into a locker room and watching, Turk Wendell from, wherever he's in Colorado, connect to like Yorkis Perez and look out for their kids. When 9/11 happened, we were all in Atlanta, and, we were all feeling something, and it didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter. We all kind of looked out for our families, each other's kids. And I think when you have these moments, and you have a lot of them in sports, that we shouldn't hide that from seeing it as a possible way to be a great lesson for larger society. And so I'm a big rejecter of stick to sports, right? Like I completely Dikembe Mutombo kind of feeling about it. Because I'm just like, wait a minute, sports is a great opportunity to talk and share, because you're living it every day. You're playing with a guy next to you that grew up 10 years earlier than you and is from a completely different country. And yet you're like embracing because he got the game-winning hit. I mean, that is a great lesson. And it gives us so much more patience with people and understanding and really thinking about what actually matters. Is it his skin colors? Is it religion? Or is it the fact that I want to give you the ball in the ninth inning because I know you're going to get this guy out, and I don't care.
Right. Yeah, we're going in the same direction.
Right.
All going in the
So
same direction.
so to me that's the great gift that I will always try to elevate. And as you know, I've written on a lot of subjects, and sports has been my way in, from Colin Kaepernick to Jim Cott to Tim Anderson's battle with Josh Donaldson to George Floyd to whatever. I mean, sports has a voice in this that could actually help find the harmony. And like my example, let's talk about police briefly. I grew up in Teaneck, as I mentioned. A volunteer detective, police officer from Teaneck Police, was my summer league coach with the Teaneck Lancers. And his name was Gene O'Reilly. And his son, Glenn, is, by the way, the chief currently in Teaneck, but also was a teammate of mine. Well, there's 5 or 6 of those guys went into law enforcement later. And actually, Bobby Maynard, now I see him at least a couple times a year. He goes to games and we get together. So these police officers were my teammates. And, and when my father got sick, one example of how close they were, they always looked out for my mom. My mom, my dad's gone, we're all out of the house. My mom's by herself. And Teaneck Police were always popping in. And she was a teacher in the school system. So she, they knew her and loved her. So they were always looking out. So at one day, my dad had one of his episodes, had to call the ambulance. And on the radio, they were missing something they needed. And one of the police officers intercepted it and brought the device to the ambulance and brought, and I was just because we're teammates, right? So when my father passed away, Teaneck Police shows up in all my friends and teammates and all, they show up in full uniform. They come and, pay their respects. They go outside, and I thought they were on duty, so they had to go. And then when we come out to drive to the burial, there was a police escort outside. And so they escorted us all, blocked off all the lanes of the highway so we could get off. So my point is that that's also my experience with police. Yeah, a police officer stopped me in my driveway and asked me if I was shoveling for money. That did happen. However, the reason why I was optimistic on what I could do about that was because I had police officers in my life that looked out for my family and are brothers to this day, right? So just being open-minded to like, you don't want to oversimplify people because of the uniform, their skin color, their faith, or whatever. I've found too many examples in sports alone that completely blows that out of the water, completely, right? And I would venture to say, if given the opportunity and the exposure and the intimacy, that would actually be true in anything, right? But if we're in our silos and we don't get the experience, then yeah, you can just watch the same shows and reinforce the same ideas without actually challenging it, because everybody's telling you you're brilliant, everything you believe is right. That's a problem, and sports deny that. Sports deny that all the time because we're constantly saying we're constantly getting new evidence to suggest that, wait a minute, the boxes we put people in are complete mythology, right? So I would say, like, globally, even though it's not a succinct say, okay, this is what I would share from a one-line motto, I think that is what sports has given me. The reason why I'm able to take on social justice questions is because sports has informed me all the way and have given me all these examples to draw on.
Well,
and that's really like
that's
the
perfect.
underline of everything that we do. Like that's a perfect example, Doug, of always be cool, right? And having those experiences through sports, growing up, your buddies that you grow with through the police force. I mean, that just goes to show that you've met some really amazing people from all different walks of life. That gives you a whole different perspective on folks.
Absolutely. The power of staying away from our silos, like you said, and embracing everyone, making sure that everyone is celebrated. What a phenomenal theme to wrap this up, man. Doug, thank you so much.
Man, thank you
We
for being
really
here
appreciate
with
your
us.
time.
Yes.
We'll wrap up the show in here in a second. If you wouldn't mind just staying on the line for 30 extra seconds when we stop recording. Guys, this has been the Always Be... Actually, before we end, Doug, if somebody wants to kind of get in touch with you or buy your book or watch you or read you, what's the best way that everyone can get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, it's pretty easy. I'm all over the place. I'm on Twitter. I definitely tweet a lot. Probably the best from an email standpoint, you could just go to mail@DougGlanville.com or go to the website DougGlanville.com and find me there. But if you shoot a message on Twitter even, I respond to all the stuff. So you can definitely find me on all the social media channels as well.
There you have it, folks. All you got to do is email Doug Glanville. You got his private email right there. Thank you so much, Doug. This has been the Always Be Cool podcast. Bobby Kerr, Darren Copeland.
Thanks, everyone.
Find us where you find all playlists and all podcasts on Apple, Spotify, and Google at Always Be Cool Podcast on Instagram and Facebook.
Big thanks,
Guys,
Doug.
thanks so much, everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care.